Welcome to the Saturday in Athens podcast. I'm your host, Seth Saunders, joined as always by my co host, James Kim, and we are just beyond fired up because we have a return guest with us and one of our favorites, George Somerville of the College Chaps podcast, is with us. George, it's fantastic to see you, brother. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Hi, Seth. Hi, James. No, it's great to be back. Thank you. And I thoroughly enjoyed it last time. I get to meet James this time, and I get to get you guys out your bed at some ungodly hour to come speak to me. So thank you for that.
It's bright and early here in the States. And George is in the middle part of his day, which just means he's a little bit closer to college football Saturday than we are. So we are jealous of that. Well, boys, it is the biggest matchup of the young college football season, with Georgia and Alabama facing off in Tuscaloosa on Saturday night. And unfortunately, I am not going to lead the show with that. I'm going to lead the show with something else. I want to talk to you boys about the situation that has unfolded at UNLV this week, with Matthew Sluka deciding to redshirt after playing 3 games this year for the undefeated Running Rebels. And the premise for redshirting is that there had been, in his words, unfulfilled NIL promises. And boys, unfortunately, I think this is the world that we're living in now. The story has kind of been fleshed out a little bit more, and it seems like a verbal offer was made to him by someone on the coaching staff. Some reports have said it was UNLV offensive coordinator Brennan Marion. Coach Odom has said that there was no formal offer made from the school. The NIL collective has backed that up and said the same thing. The family has essentially said that, payments weren't made that were supposed to be made. And this is kind of where we sit. And then kind of as a buttress to that, Bear Alexander from USC, who Georgia fans are certainly familiar with, announces yesterday his intention to do the same. I guess let's start with thoughts on that, just because I'm interested to hear kind of where you boys sit. I know how I feel about it and kind of where I sit, and obviously it's a very nuanced issue. But George, why don't you tell us how that news struck you?
Well, first of all, I was shocked, to be honest, to hear it, because I think the social media fallout from that was a player who was quitting on his team, which is 3-0, and UNLV now very hotly tipped to make it to the college football playoffs. So I think there was a lot of fallout from the fact that you had a player who was quitting on his team. And I have to say, the UNLV program is a program very close to my heart. I think I shared the last time I was on, Seth, that my very first trips to the US were to Las Vegas, and I had some friends over there. I spent a lot of time there. I know the program back then was nothing like it is just now. They've spent a lot of money on that program now and really focused on the football, and you're seeing the results of it. So program pretty close to my heart. I guess then the next few hours after that, there was a lot of, he said, she said kind of situation where more of the facts were coming out. My general takeaway from this, which is, literally 24 hours after the story broke, is that it's a learning curve for everybody. And I was on the SEC head coaches teleconference yesterday, and I think almost every coach was asked about the situation and how, I think the words that were used, what were the safeguards that they had in place that type of situation wouldn't happen with them. And many of them said, well, listen, it's impossible to predict how this is going to play out. And I think Kirby Smart gave a pretty full answer in that. It's about the relationship you have with the player when you recruit the player, the relationship with the family, dare I say, advisors. So, and I can appreciate that, right? But to me, the learnings that you take away from that is that everything should be in writing. I come from a finance background where everything is nailed down to the floor. You don't take someone's word for it. There's a level of trust there, which is obviously broken down, which is why the player and his family have said that they can't possibly continue to play at UNLV. So, but my thoughts on that, as the question you asked, was I was pretty shocked by the story.
Jamie, how about you, brother? You and I haven't talked about this yet, so I'm interested to hear what you thought about it too.
I think this is going to become the new normal. I think that, especially with the 4-game, being able to play with 4 games and with the redshirt, I think this is going to become the new normal with a lot of players. I don't think it's going to become the normal with starting quarterbacks, but I think it is going to become the new normal with, backup players, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, stuff like that. My biggest issue with it is that this is going to become more of an NIL is going to become more of an incentive-based thing going forward. Like George said, it's going to have to be in writing. I think it's going to be an issue where if you perform to a certain level for transfers, you get X amount of dollars, and it's going to have to be in writing. So I think that we're going to see more of that going forward. I think the collectives are going to have to get creative in their writing, and they're going to have to get lawyers to write these contracts. And players, we're going to start seeing agents with players more backing this stuff up just to avoid issues like this. Because relationships can only go so far because promises are going to be broken. We've got millions and millions of dollars trading hands here, and it's just, you can't please everybody. So it's just the nature of the business. It's going to happen sooner or later, and this is just the tip of the iceberg with us until regulations get put in place.
All I was going to say was, I think Coach Saban and Dabo Swinney, Clemson kind of prophesized this type of situation, right? They talked about, Saban was very much about, well, create value for yourself and the money will flow. And as James has just rightly pointed out, we've now got a generation of player who wants the money up front. They look what I did in high school. That's why you're going to pay me. And Florida went through this 2 seasons ago with Rashada, right? I mean, so this is not a new situation. I agree with James. I think it's a recurring issue that they're going to have, but I think schools are going to have to really try and lock this down when they're entering into discussions. It is a contractual situation we find ourselves now.
I certainly understand the reality of the landscape that we're in, and I've been pretty steady since everything that was announced that I've always been a proponent of players getting compensated. It doesn't bother me at all. I've always felt there was, I think, a lack of justice in the fact that a kid could be in the band, and if he was an excellent trumpet player, be paid by the New York Symphony to play for them during the summertime, but a college athlete was not able to do the same things. So I don't have an issue with players operating in the market. I think the issue is how it's been almost unleashed with no bounds, right? And there's just no framework for anybody to work within, which is not great for the kids and not great for the schools. So I get that, okay? I get the economic side of it. I'm going to come at you from the naive college football fan, though, where I still hold a place in my heart, just the innocence of it. And what upset me, or maybe upset's the wrong word, I think what made me sad is probably the best word, is that you got a program that's 3-0 for the first time since I think like 1984. You have a team that is piquing the interest of America, a G5 school that has a chance to crash the playoff party. At UNLV, a place that is historically not known for football prowess. And for this to happen with them being 3-0 and in a position of leadership with the quarterback, just kind of makes your heart hurt a little bit, right? Like just the teammates. That's my thing is what kind of message does it send to kids about loyalty to your teammates? And look, I understand it's a loyalty thing both ways. Promises were broken to the kid, and I'm not downplaying any of that. I'm just saying, man, I don't love the example that it sets out, right? And what we're showing to younger generations. And so I think that's kind of where I sit with it. Is the further I've gotten away from the news, I'm just more sad about it. Sad about kind of what it means for the general landscape of the sport. And look, man, I'm not saying everything is all sunshine and rainbows, and it's not my expectation. Okay, I understand it's a real world, and this is what goes on. But it's just one of those things where I think this is that step where college football now feels very much like the NFL. And I think that was some folks' concern to start. Essentially, boys, this is just a contract holdout. That's all it is. Mm-hmm. Kids saying, I've got some leverage. We're 3-0. I'm the start quarterback. I'm going to sit unless the checks start coming. And I don't know, man. It's sad. That's the only thing I can say. It makes me feel sad.
And I know Lane Kiffin was criticised for it because he's the biggest proponent of using the transfer portal. But he said a year ago, how are you supposed to coach a team when you don't know what your team's going to be next year? But actually, how does Barry Odom coach a team when he doesn't know what his team's going to be this year? And it's almost I think I get very tired of the argument. Well, the coach can walk away at any time. So you're allowing the coach to walk away, but you're not allowing the players to walk away. Well, the player can't walk away in this situation. The player can't up sticks and walk to Colorado and start playing football. He's going to redshirt and he's going to transfer in the transfer portal. So you find yourself in this ludicrous situation where the player's going to sit back. And I agree with you, Seth. There's nobody who I don't think there's many people who want to sit back and say the players shouldn't be paid. But nil came about because schools were selling the number 4 jersey in the shop with the player's name on the back of it.
Yeah.
Not because of the situation we've got here. And frankly, we could spend the whole podcast talking about this. Players driving Lamborghinis and stuff like that. That's not really how nil was meant to be. And I'm starting to sound like a grumpy old man there, but we are so far away from the premise of nil that it is, to coin a phrase, the Wild West that we're currently sitting in.
Yeah, that they're in a, fortunate's the wrong word, but they are in a nice position where they had also, through the transfer portal, gotten Haj Malik Williams into their program, who was a fantastic quarterback at Campbell at the FCS level. I'm going to throw something at you here, George. I'm going to put you on the spot with a little quiz. Do you know what the mascot is for Campbell University in small town North Carolina, Bowie's Creek, North Carolina?
It's a camel, isn't it?
Yeah, what a pull, George. That was outstanding. No prep for that, ladies and gentlemen. George with an all-time pull. Yes, the camels. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law both went to Campbell, and they sell a hat at their bookstore that just says Humpers, which is just an excellent piece of college apparel. So what a pull, George. I'm so proud. But yeah.
I think they like you, they've got a great T-shirt. That's what sticks to my mind, is they've got a great T-shirt. And for those of us on this side of the pond, we love a good college football T-shirt. So there you go. That's where that came from.
Oh, that's excellent. And look, he was a great player at Campbell. He was there 5 years. He's taking advantage of the 6th-year COVID year. And he was 2-time All Big South player. I mean, really, really good player. So it'll be very interesting to see how he kind of steps in and how that team responds. They play Fresno State this weekend. So something to watch there. And thank y'all for indulging me with that. I just thought it was too big of a story and too big of a, I think, almost a landmark in the college football space for us not to talk about that, even given the massive game that's happening Saturday night, which let's turn to that now. George, James and I were talking about this a little bit off the air, but I just want to get your thoughts on how you feel about the game. This is obviously very different now that we're in the 12-team playoff era. Mm-hmm. It's not that the stakes are any smaller, but both of these teams still have a very direct path to the postseason, even if they do lose on Saturday night. So from your perspective, what is the most compelling storyline for this Georgia-Alabama matchup on Saturday night?
Well, I think the game is huge. And, you talked at the outset about this being the biggest game of the season thus far. And I was just kind of pondering on this morning before we came on about, could this be the biggest game of the season until we get to the playoffs, right? Now, you guys may disagree. You may think that depending on the result, well, actually, even with a positive result for Georgia, the Texas game might be the biggest game of the season. But this has got so many storylines attached to it. I think it just makes for compulsive viewing, and couldn't help but notice that Mark Smith and Ryan McGee were on both campuses yesterday reporting from it, and you could just tell the build up, which is what we want to have in college football. But to answer your question, Seth, I think you've got two main storylines, I think, which are linked to both coaches. You've got Kirby Smart, who, depending on which storyline you read, is trying to break the Alabama curse or the jinx or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you'll talk about that. But you've got the new kid on the block, Kalen DeBoer, coming in, and they're interlinked, because Kirby Smart is now trying to beat an Alabama team which has not got Nick Saban there. It's got Kalen DeBoer. I think we're still trying to see what that Kalen DeBoer team looks like, and I thought it was interesting on last week's head coach's teleconference where Kalen DeBoer was quite open. He said, we've not opened the playbook fully here. The offensive playbook it will not be open fully this year. So there was a bedding in there, and a lot of people read into that about the quarterback situation. But actually, I think he's just trying to, ease this his style into the program. And you've got Kirby Smart, who is trying to beat Alabama. I think that's slightly disingenuous to what Kirby Smart has done at Georgia. I'm still of the opinion that Georgia's the best team in college football. And I think people will be pulling their hair out saying, well, why is it not Texas? Well, I mean, I think Georgia typically in the last few years under Kirby Smart have had a slower start to the season. It's almost like he's winding them up. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not how you start the season, it's how you finish the season. I've liked what I've seen from Georgia. I think Georgia fans, and I've been around Georgia fans, and please excuse me for saying this, are prone to overreaction. So the Kentucky game was very much a kind of like, what is happening? What's going on?
Yeah.
But actually, I think it was a very, given the circumstances and given the way that Kentucky were, really played very badly in the South Carolina game, and they were really trying to prove a point, and I think they did prove a point. So I think, the benefit to Georgia here is that they've had one SEC game under the belt, whereas Alabama, this is their first SEC game. To your point, Seth, I do think that this game coming early in the season suits both teams, because I think they get to see where they are in the season. It's not fatal to their playoff hopes, but it does add a lot of pressure to the losing coach's shoulders. If Alabama are beaten at home, the questions will be, is Kalen DeBoer the right guy? Is he out of his depth in the SEC? All these criticisms will come, and if Georgia come away from a defeat, then it will be an Alabama curse. So I think there's pressure mounting on both coaches. But you're right, it's not a death knell to the playoff hopes.
How about you, Jimmy? I mean, I think George summed up pretty well kind of what we were talking about off air. I mean, I think all that hits the nail on the head in a lot of ways.
Yeah, with a 12-team playoff, this isn't the end-all, be-all game. It's still, in our opinion, the biggest game for Georgia this season. Texas may be the flashier matchup if Texas continues to be number one. But for us, Alabama is the pun intended, I guess, elephant in the room. So I hate that term with them being the Tide, but it is what it is. So it's with the way the season ended last year, my biggest concern for this game and my biggest issue with this game is after the first drive, Georgia was physically dominated on the lines of scrimmage. I want to see how that plays out. And we were talking about this off air, Seth. I think that if that's not an MO of a Kirby Smart team, Kirby wants to change that. I think that if Georgia has their way on the lines of scrimmage, Georgia will take care of business. And I'm not saying it's going to be a comfortable win, but it'll be a win nonetheless. If things go the way they did in the SEC championship game, Georgia may still win, but it's going to be tense. I'll just leave it at that for Georgia fans. And George, you said it, Georgia fans are very overreactionary to everything. Kentucky game, I mean, that's what we do in Kentucky. We go in, we do what we have to do, we get out with a win, and move on to the next weekend and hope there's no injuries. So I hope that this weekend is a good victory for Georgia. But if it's not, it's still not the end of the world because of the 12-team playoff. If this was a couple years ago, we would be much more nervous about this game.
Yeah, I think it's the perception thing. I think that's the big anvil for Georgia. Is Kirby's 1-5 when he plays Alabama, which means he's 1-5 against Coach Saban. And I always do like to point out this isn't like a just Kirby versus Nick thing. That's pretty much a Nick versus everybody thing. And so it's not like Kirby was unique in that, but I do think that is something that hangs over the legacy currently. And I think the questions about, is Georgia now the Alabama of college football? Meaning, have they taken the place as the program, the standard that everybody else is chasing? And in some ways, I think that's an unanswered question. And mainly because of this. I think last December left that lingering in the atmosphere. I think everybody probably anticipated that Georgia was going to win that football game. And for them not to, it leaves some things unanswered. And so I think that's the biggest thing for me Saturday night is I think inherently with that comes some pressure. And whether or not they're real or not, you're fighting some ghosts. And so I think Georgia has to deal with that Saturday night. And I think having to do that at Bryant Denny during a night game against Alabama, it's something to watch for sure. I mean, that's the storyline for me. Is do they play fast? Do they play free? Or are they carrying some weight with them? And so from my perspective, especially given how Georgia has started in their 2 Power 5 games against Clemson and Kentucky offensively, I think it is paramount that that offense starts fast. I mean, they have got to get going early and score some points, and preferably a touchdown, just to kind of loosen up. And so, from your perspective, George, what are you expecting to be the matchup that turns that game for one team or the other?
Well, I think in the little that we've seen of Alabama thus far, it's Georgia's ability to stop the explosive plays, right? So I don't have the stats in front of me, but I know that Jalen Milroe's the long ball from Milroe has been very effective, but I think actually it is the run game for Alabama that's going to win the game. And I think people love to see a 40-yard toss down the field, but actually I think that the run game is Jam Miller and Justice Haynes have been pretty impressive thus far, and the stats back that up. So I think it's it's Georgia's ability to stop those explosive plays and actually feed into. I think Kirby Smart said this, but it's about getting Milroe into the throws that he's less comfortable with, so the kind of shorter throws into maybe crowded territory where Georgia can exploit that and maybe create a turnover. I think James is right. Every SEC game is won in the trenches, right? So it's going to be the ability for them to stop. And then if they can stop or at least slow down the Alabama offense, then I think it takes the pressure a little bit off the Georgia offense. And I stand by what I said. I think Georgia is the best team in college football just now. I actually think the resume thus far is better than anybody else's because they've beaten Clemson and Kentucky. And tell me another team in college football that's played. Everyone loves to write off Clemson, right? They're yesterday's team, but actually, I think they're proving that the Dabo is slowly starting to get that moving in the right direction, and can defy anyone to go to Kentucky and come away with a victory. So I actually think they are the best team in college football. So, but the one thing that would contradict myself slightly here is Carson Beck never really impresses me, but he doesn't need to impress me because Stetson Bennett never impressed me, right? He isn't a flashy player. He just needs to be really, really efficient and do his job, and he's done that so far. So if you can take the pressure off the offense a little bit by creating stops on the defense, then I think Georgia can grind out a result. But Bryant Denny on a Saturday night is a very different challenge, I think.
Jimmy, you mentioned it earlier, and we've talked about it many times as it pertains to these Georgia-Alabama matchups, but I'm pretty sure I know where you will have your eye on Saturday night. What are you looking for from the defensive and offensive lines for Georgia and Alabama in this game?
It's just the physicalities perspective. I mean, I mentioned that earlier, but I also think that if we can get pressure on Milroe, then I think that it'll be a tough day for him. Last week last year in the SEC championship game, we basically played a shell and we're trying to contain him in the run game, and basically let him sit back there and kind of pick the defense apart. I didn't really understand the game plan there. So I think that this year, look what South Florida did 2 weeks ago. They got pressure on him. They rattled him. Now, granted, they put up 42 points, but that was a tight game going into the fourth quarter. Mm-hmm. So I think that get pressure on Milroe is going to be key. But George made a very good point. The run game for Alabama is, and what I think, probably the most dominant run game in college football right now. Haynes really wish he would have been a legacy at Georgia, but he chose his own path, and he looks very impressive. Milroe and him, they use the RPO very well. They use the play action very well. They use everything very well with the run game. I love what they do on offense with that perspective. But if when they drop back to pass, just straight drop back, if we can get pressure on Milroe, we can force some turnovers. What scares me the most, though, isn't the run game. It's Ryan Williams. If contain Ryan Williams, I think Georgia wins the game. If Ryan Williams breaks loose and has another huge day, I don't think the results can be good.
I so appreciate when you boys tee me up like this, because you both hit on things that I precisely wanted to talk about. So the first one, George, you mentioned explosives, all right? The numbers bear out what you said. Alabama's offense averages almost 12 explosive plays per game, which is termed as a rush of, I can't remember if it's 12 or 13 yards or more, and passes of 16 yards or more. They are one of the best in the country, certainly one of the best in the SEC. I think maybe Tennessee and Ole Miss are the only ones that have more explosives per game on offense than Alabama does. And from a touchdown perspective, Alabama has more 20-plus yard touchdowns than any team in the country with 13. Now, on the flip side of that, Georgia limits explosives very well on defense. They only give up 3 a game. They have given up one play, boys, one of 20-plus yards all year. That was a 36-yard reception to Antonio Williams in the first game of the season against Clemson. So something's got to give there. I'm very interested to see what that is. And Jimmy, you bring it up, man. There's probably no kid I've been more impressed with than Ryan Williams this college football season. Kid's 17, boys. I mean, can't even buy a pack of smokes, but he ain't got no problems lighting up defenses. So I am very compelled to see him. He's got 10 catches on the year. 4 of them have gone for touchdowns. And I think 4 catches over 30 yards. So who garners that matchup? Does Georgia put Dalen Everett on an island with him and say, hey, look, this is your game to step up. This is your game to become Kamari Lassiter. This is your game to become Keely Ringo. Like, do they do that? Do they make the choice to rotate and have Julian Humphrey roll to him sometimes? Do they bracket him with Malachi Starks or KJ Bolden? I'm fascinated to see what the strategy is on that, because I think if you're sitting in those defensive meetings, the message has to be, number 2 can't beat us. Ryan Williams cannot stretch the field and beat us on explosives. If Alabama is going to beat us, we have to have them grind it out, these 8, 9, 10-plus play drives. And then you both bring up Jalen Milroe, who has been spectacular this season. He has 14 total touchdowns, 8 through the air, 6 on the ground, 0 interceptions, so has controlled that turnover margin very, very well. But I think you bring up a great point, James. I think Georgia's kryptonite last year was they had injuries to Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and Smile London was not fully healthy. So they're inside linebackers who are tasked with containing the quarterback in kind of these spy looks. It was freshmen. You had C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson getting a lot of run. That experience level is up now. I have been very vocal that I think C.J. Allen is one of the best linebackers in America. And so that is the matchup I'm very focused on, is Georgia's inside linebackers against Jalen Milroe, to see kind of who wins that cat and mouse game, who can bust a big play, and who kind of keeps contained on the others. So I just think it's going to be awesome, guys. Just from a straight football perspective, I am so excited for this matchup. Number one, because the atmosphere is going to be electric, but also there's so many good players on both sides of the football for both teams that it's just going to be great theater, I think. I want to ask you this, George, from a special teams perspective. I feel like the third phase is not something that is talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Georgia has an outstanding place kicker in Peyton Woodring. I think is going to, if the season ended today, be in that Groza conversation. And then Anthony Evans returning kicks is about as fearless as they come. So both can be weapons there. Alabama, because of the circumstances of their games, hasn't really had to use the kicking game from a scoring perspective yet.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that could be a factor on Saturday night, the 2 different special teams units?
Well, it was interesting. Kalen DeBoer was asked about this on yesterday, and he was asked about who was going to be, kick return, where they're going to move those duties about, and he answered, well, it doesn't really matter because George is very good at stopping the return. So I think a little bit of that was he wasn't going to let any secrets out, but also I think he was acknowledging the fact that George has been really good in that phase of the game. I think it depends on your view. You guys always sound, well, not always, you're sounding quite nervous because I think your Georgia fans going into Bryant Denny, but I think it's got the potential to be a pretty close game. And if it's a close game, then special teams ultimately kind of is what happens, whether it's an error on special teams or a great play on special teams. That's how it's going to play out. So I think it's going to have a bearing on the game. It's always hard to predict what it's going to be, but I think, but that's what makes these games exciting. It's SEC football at its very best. The stadium will be absolutely packed on Saturday. Can't wait for it.
Jimmy, what's your thoughts? You think there could be a big special teams play that could flip this thing? I feel like there's always, whether it's been block punts in SEC title games or something like that. I feel like when Georgia has big wins, they do something special in special teams to kind of propel that a little bit.
I'm more concerned about a special teams blunder costing the game than a special teams. Just so you know, Georgia, I'm the pessimist of the group in case you can't tell. So
I couldn't tell, to be honest.
Yeah. Anthony Evans is fearless, but it also, every time there's someone right in his face and he doesn't call for a fair catch, I'm screaming at the TV, "What are you doing?" So that's gonna cost him at some point this season. I just hope it's not Saturday. Kicking game, I'm not worried about. I mean, Thorson and Woodring are spectacular, but Evans gives me mild heart attacks every time when he does that. So he may break one, but he may fumble one. It's going to happen at some point. Both of them are going to happen this season. I just hope it's not Saturday.
So, George, Jimmy and I have started pursuing something a little bit new this fall. Obviously football is here now, whether it's the college or the NFL level, all the way through to February. And James and I like to partake in some fantasy games, and some of those are straight through underdog fantasy, which we really have enjoyed. And one of the things we looked at the other week was they had a higher lower guess there on what Bret Thorson's punts would be, and we were just dead set against Kentucky that he would have 0 punts. So we're very much on the lower, and I think he punted like a career high that night against Kentucky. So our lower play that night was not wise, but it still made it fun to have kind of a fun thing to look at during the game, and something like that's player stat based, and that's what you get with Underdog. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward, and signing up is even easier. Just head over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com. Sign up with promo code SAP, and Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code SAP, to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. You must be 18 years or older. Unless you are in Massachusetts or Arizona, then you must be 21 or older. And in New England or Alabama, you have to be 19 or older. You have to be present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. This is void in Colorado. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. If you're in Arizona, that's 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. If you're in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY, or text HOPE-NY 467-369. Now, speaking of some player values here, I am interested in who are the players for the game on Saturday night that each of you is keenly watching. Who do you think has the ability to flip the game for either team? And it doesn't have to be, a Ryan Williams or Jalen Milroe or Carson Beck. Anybody that you want. I'm just interested to see kind of where y'all are focused from. This is a guy that I think could really flip the scales for one team or the other. How about you, George?
I think I mentioned him already. I think a lot of focus is on Justice Haynes, but actually I think Jam Miller excites me greatly as a running back. I love to watch the running game. I think where space can be created for him. Yeah, actually, I think the rushing yards so far are reasonably similar. So I think they've kind of shared the payload, if you like, in carrying the ball. But I'm really intrigued to see how the offensive line can create a little bit of space to him. As James already rightly pointed out, there'll be a lot of eyes on Milroe, and of course, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you keep Milroe in the pocket, then you're liable to get that explosive play from a long throw. But if you get him out the pocket, I akin him to like a racehorse, because once he gets his legs stretched, there's no stopping him. Mm-hmm. So it's really trying to limit that. And I think that's where the running backs have really exploited this season. So Jam Miller, for me, is the one that kind of stands out. I'll be really intrigued to see how he gets on.
How about you, James?
Same thing as every week. Got to get the tight ends involved. Lawson Lucky, Oscar Delp have to get involved. I think that they're the key to Georgia's offense. I mean, they're obviously no Brock Bowers this season, but Delp was a big part of the offense last year when Bowers was injured, and he's been MIA this year. Lucky's been MIA. So they have to get the tight ends involved. I think that they're the key to the passing game. They're the key to opening things up. I think they'll open things up for Bell and Lovett. And that's my key to watching the Georgia offense this week is I want to see Delp and Lucky get involved.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I'm glad you brought that up. Oscar Delp's absence has been mystifying to me. He has 3 catches on the year, which I don't think that was anybody's expectation. I think everybody imagined that 4 would be involved early and often, and it just hasn't happened. And, you know, they've done a nice job, I think, getting Lawson Lucky some looks. But, you know, in the Kentucky game, I don't think he had to throw his way the whole year. So I agree. Their tight end play has to change because their receiving game, the passing game, is very much dependent, in my opinion, on that unit as a group. And I lump in receivers and tight ends to that. They have to kind of try to fill the gap that number 19 and number 84 left when Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey went to the NFL, and 2 gigantic pairs of shoes to fill. And so, yeah, Oscar Delp got to be involved. I tell you, for me, boys, it's on Georgia's defense, because what scares me about Alabama is you bring up a great point, George, with Jam Miller. I think he is electric, and his yards per carry this year bear that out. I think he's got to be contained. Jalen is what Jalen is, man. I mean, he is lightning in a bottle. And so to keep him contained and to keep him from big plays is paramount. And then Ryan Williams is, I think, the special season in that soup. You know, he just gives them a dimension that a lot of teams across America don't have. And so for me, I'm looking at 2 players on Georgia's defense. One, I said his name earlier, Dalen Everett. I think the expectation has been that Dalen Everett is going to be the number 1 cornerback for Georgia. And I think James and I especially are a little bit tepid about that throwing on him yet. However, he is in year 3 in the system. That is the year when Kirby Smart's defensive backs usually blossom. And so this is his opportunity, I think, to show that, to show whether he is blooming or whether he's wilting. Unfortunately, the bright lights of Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday night are going to tell us one way or the other. The other one I'm going to throw at you boys is Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, TID. He has been having a magnificent year, and I think he could be that transformational player along Georgia's defensive line, which I think, if we're being honest, they lacked last year. They didn't have a Jalen Carter, a Jordan Davis, a Devontae Wyatt, somebody who could be a disruptor. So TID is the guy that I am looking for to create some havoc along that defensive line and bust up the run game and the pass game for Alabama. Because for me, I think right now, all we know that Georgia can hang its hat on for sure is their defense. and the offense is a little bit still, for me, an unknown. So that's kind of where I'm focused.
I think the question mark for me with Georgia is because I think where Alabama's weakness is clearly is in the kind of at safety and cornerback, and I think Kirby Smart will look to try and exploit that, but the question mark is at wide receiver about who's going to be able to step into that, because Georgia don't have an explosive 17-year-old. So I think the question mark is going to be about how they can exploit that, because I think there's definitely a weakness there in the Alabama secondary. Go back to James's point about Georgia tight ends. I think Georgia's suffering a little bit from the exceptional talent that you've had previously. Obviously, every team is going to miss Brock Bowers, but you're also still missing the physicality of Daniel Washington. I know he's been away for 2 years now, but just the imposing sight of Big O just lining up against you. And I think that worked really well for those 2 seasons where they played together, where the tight ends were just so dominant because you had Washington, who's just a mountain of a man, and Browers, who is an incredible athlete. And Oscar Delp is neither of those. He's neither physically imposing or is he Brock Bowers. And I think that's where, to James's point, where Georgia would typically have stretched using the tight ends, are really struggling to do that this year. And whether Oscar Delp can step into that, because he was very highly recruited when he came in, remains to be seen, I guess.
I think the last line I saw, boys, was somewhere around -2, 2.5, maybe some places 1.5. How do you feel about that, George? What's your pick, given that number?
Well, this could come down to a field goal, which I think is obviously where the spread is coming from. It's difficult to tell. I'll go back to, I love dropping this line, but I go back to 2019. I was in Bryant Denny to watch Alabama play LSU, and the game of the century, if you want to call it that. And if you remember that game, LSU really raced away to a massive a lead by half time. Game was all but over, but the Bryant Denny crowd brought Alabama back into that game, and it wasn't as close as it kind of suggested, but certainly it became much more of a matchup. I'm wondering what this is going to be like on Saturday. I wonder whether Georgia can hit the ground running and create a bit of a lead, because I think the crowd does play a part here. I think the crowd does try to bring them back into it. I just don't know what Kalen DeBoer looks like in the SEC. We've not seen it yet, so we don't know. And the other thing is the vast majority of that coaching staff is relatively new. So it's going to be interesting. I think it could come down to a field goal, or hopefully not, as James suggested, some sort of error on the special teams. I think Alabama might sneak it. It's interesting. I go back to a point that you made earlier on in terms of who wins this game. I can't see Georgia losing to both Alabama and Texas. So if Georgia loses to Alabama, they don't lose Texas, and if they beat Alabama, then I think it's all to play for in the Texas game. But I think it's going to be tight. Whatever happens, this is going to be a really close. It's going to be must-watch TV.
How about you, Jimmy? Where are you sitting on it?
I have it at. I love the under. I want to go with that first of all. I love the under. I think this is going to be a rock fight. Because the over/under set at 48.5, and I'd be shocked if it gets there. I have it 21-17 Bama.
Oh, 17 for the Dogs. Okay. I'm going to go a little counter. I also think it'd be one-score game. I'm going to go 27-24, so we're going to get the SEC title game all over again. But I am taking the Dogs. I am cautiously optimistic, and here's why. While all of Dog Nation was wringing their hands about the Kentucky matchup, I was thrilled, and this is why. I think Kirby functions better when he feels counted out or feels slighted. And for all of America, after them showing up in a very lackluster manner in Lexington, to kind of say, oh, Georgia ain't what we thought they were. They're going to have a real problem in Tuscaloosa in 2 weeks. And for him to have 2 weeks, not just to prepare, but 2 weeks to chastise his roster and tell them they're not even close to how great they think they are. I just think, man, that motivational factor and angry, motivated Kirby is my favorite Kirby. And so I feel good about that. That's the piece of it I feel nice about. It's weird. I don't think Kirby's a great front runner. I really don't. I think he likes being discounted. I don't know if it's the small town Georgia in him or what, but he loves that angle. And I'm sure he's been on them all week about nobody thinks you're the best. We're going to get beat. We're going 7-5, all the things, right? And so that piece of it, I'm super interesting. I also think you bring up a good point, George. Kalen DeBoer is sort of the untalked about almost X factor in this whole thing. And, Nick Saban, and I've been very open about this, he is the unquestioned GOAT for me. and I think in some ways was worth a touchdown all by himself. And so for him not to be there in a game of this magnitude, I am fascinated to see how Kalen DeBoer coaches this ball game on Saturday night. And some of that is just your team in a lot of ways. Your value as a head coach is they carry your swag. And there is nobody on the planet that had more swag than Nick Saban. And so I always thought his teams embodied that. They just had this quiet, assured arrogance about them. I don't know any other way to put it. In the best possible way. And does Kalen DeBoer's Alabama come out Saturday night and have that? I'm fascinated to see that. So yeah, that is something I can't wait to see Saturday night.
I think a lot of the stuff that's come out of Tuscaloosa, certainly this week, but prior to that, is it's a very different environment under Kalen DeBoer. It's more relaxed. It's less of the kind of, like, let's call it the drill sergeant kind of mentality, and it'll be interesting to see. I can't help think that, let's say Alabama goes down in this game, then Nick Saban goes into his locker and says, well, we're in this situation in 2014 against such and such, and
Right.
and Kalen DeBoer's going to go into his locker and it's going to be Washington or whatever, right? So that's no way to make fun of his CV. He's clearly a hugely talented coach, but is untested in the SEC at this moment in time. So this is his kind of proving ground. This season is his proving ground. But to play such a massive game so early in the season is certainly a baptism of fire, I think.
Well, look, this game has undoubtedly sucked a lot of the oxygen out of the college football room this weekend, but there are still some fantastic games on tap throughout the rest of the game. And George, if I haven't told you before, you should know something about me. I am a large proponent of college rivalry games that involve some type of post-game trinket or trophy. And we have one of the best, I think, on Saturday with Minnesota, Michigan in the battle for the Little Brown Jug. Even though, from a sexiness perspective, Michigan has dominated the matchup historically, right? I think the Little Brown Jug has only gone home with Minnesota something like 4 times in the past 30 plus years, which, if you're a Golden Gopher, that's just a sad number to hear. But it's still one of our favorites, and boy, it's steeped in history. So what are you boys thinking about that one? How do you feel about this Minnesota-Michigan matchup? Obviously, Michigan is searching for some offense, but coming off a massive win over the USC Trojans last weekend.
Well, it's a difficult one. So I've got friends who live in Minneapolis now. I've been to Dinkytown. I've been to watch the Golden Gophers play. It's a very cold part of the world to have to sit and watch football. But they're having tough times, right? PG Fleck came into that program as he was going to turn it around, and for a year or two, it looked as if Row the Boat was going to win through. But last season was really very tough for them, and I don't think Michiganers, everyone wrote Michigan off, but I don't think Michigan are as bad as people are talking about. And for me, every big program that goes through, Georgia go through this every year, Alabama go through this every year, where they clear out to the NFL and then they have to start again. I'm not sure if Cheryl Moore's the guy. I really don't know. But what I do know is a program of that size does replace talent with talent. This might be a down year for Michigan in terms of winning the national championship, but I don't think this is going to be an unsuccessful year. I think their bigger game comes when they have to play the Buckeyes, obviously, because that's the benchmark. I cannot see Michigan falling at the hands of Minnesota in this game.
How about you, Jimmy?
You know how I feel about Row the Boat.
I do, and but I still be shocked if you pick them in this win. Once again, I love the under's 35.5. I think it'll be, like 31-3. I think this is going to be a blowout. Michigan's going to win, but I kind of disagree with you a little bit. I think Michigan kind of found something last week. They're going to be a very similar to what they were last year, kind of a punch you in the mouth, but I think they're going to be just a heavy run, throw 10 to 15 times a game. They're going to throw less than they did last year. They're going to try to limit their mistakes and have suffocating defense. They're just going to try to dominate the trenches, which they have very good offensive and defensive lines, and they're going to continue to just do what they do. They're going to look very similar to what they did last year with McCarthy. They're just going to throw a little bit less. They're not going to have explosive plays except on the run game.
Yeah, it's going to be real hard for me to pick PJ Fleck and the boys. I would love for them to beat the Wolverines, but I just don't foresee it happening. I think in some ways Michigan may have found something against USC, and they may have found an identity. I think they kind of have to lean into, our head coach is an old O-line guy, and we're just going to grind you out and play punishing defense and run the ball down your throat. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that at noon on Saturday afternoon, and I think Minnesota's probably not going to have an answer for it. So, yeah, I think the Little Brown Jug will be safe in Ann Arbor for another year. But still, one of my favorites. Love me a rivalry trophy. So yeah. I want to stay in the Big Ten because there's another – feels weird to even say this out loud – big matchup in the Big Ten with Bret Bielema's Fightin Illini, undefeated Fightin Illini after a big win over the Cornhuskers last week in overtime, playing Penn State. And I think Penn State, in a lot of ways, do we know who they are yet? I know they beat West Virginia to open the year, but West Virginia's looked just okay. Are Drew Aller and the boys real and a threat in the Big Ten? Or is this kind of more of the same where they beat up on everybody but Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten?
I don't think so, to be honest. For anyone who's listened to our podcast, that you know that we're not big fans of Penn State on our podcast, and they do tend to get a bit of a kicking on a regular basis. It must be incredibly frustrating being a Penn State football fan, to be honest. It's so far, but it's so close, right? I mean, it's just they never seem to get over that hurdle. On the flip, I have to say there is a lot of positivity in the Illinois locker room. And say what you want about that head coach, but he does have an impact. And I think I've been very impressed with Illinois thus far. So actually, I was looking at some of the fixtures before. I've got this. I don't know. Is it a shock if Illinois win? I don't know, right? But I think they continue their winning season. I think they might be, I'm not saying they're going to win the Big Ten, but I think they may be disruptors in the Big Ten this season, to be honest. So I've got Penn State falling at the sword of the Fighting Illini.
Jimmy, in so many ways, this Illinois team is right up your alley.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
I love them.
They just want to grind it out. They're going to rely on them hog mollies up front, and they just want to beat you to death all game long. So where are you sitting on this?
But Altmaier is impressive. I watched that game last week, and I was really impressed with Altmaier. He lit it up last week. He looked really good. Now, I mean, Nebraska's secondary is not anything to write home about, but he looked really good last week. I think Illinois is definitely going to cover. I would not be shocked if they win. But it is Penn State on a Saturday night. I don't know if they've announced it. Is this going to be their whiteout game? Because this may be
I think Bielema had made a joke about it, which got picked up on social media. So I think they're going to do a whiteout for this game.
I don't know. I think I'll take Penn State to win, but I would not be shocked if Illinois wins this game. I think it's going to be close. Who was the game Penn State struggled against? Western Michigan, something like that. 27-24. No, it's Bowling Green. Green. They are 34-27 after blowing the doors out of West Virginia. I don't know. Penn State just. I hate James Franklin. I can't pick him to do anything. So I think Illinois keeps it close, and Penn State might pull it out. But I'll be rooting for the Illini.
It's interesting. I was trying to think about this week who I would compare Penn State to in the SEC landscape. It's interesting to me that I feel like each year in these Big Ten conversations, when it gets to the postseason, people want to put up Penn State as like, this was a big win for Michigan, and this was a big win for Ohio State. And it's like, is Penn State any good? I don't know. Like, do they get to count as a big win? And for me, it's no. Until they beat one of those two teams, I don't know, man. They're just kind of the best of the least in the Big Ten, right? And I don't think any of us would argue that the Big Ten top to bottom is some stud of a conference. I think it's been top heavy for a number of years now. And so I'm kind of with you, George. I think Illinois might win this football game, which sounds weird coming out of my mouth, but I just don't know that I believe in Penn State's offense. I think that's the rub for me. Is every year I watch these Penn State teams, and I get told, "Well, it's different this year. You know, they're different," and they're not. They're just the same. They're the same Penn State, and that's what I've seen this year. And so I don't know, man. This is kind of a prove it thing for me. They're gonna have to prove it to me for me to believe in them, and right now I don't. It's a very valid point. Saturday night in Happy Valley, whole different animal, and Bret Bielema and his Illinois squad are going to have to navigate that. But I don't know, man. There's just nothing on that offense that makes me nervous as an opposing fan or as a college football fan. So yeah, I think I'm with you, George. I think I'm rolling with the Illini in this. I think you talk about big start for that program. Good Lord.
Well, I think, to go back to James's point, if you ask which quarterback you'd rather have, I'd rather have Altmaier on my team now than Drew Allard, right? So that tells you a lot. And actually, in many ways, Penn State wins that game, even in Happy Valley on a Saturday night. I think it's a signature win on their resume for this year. But I think you're right, Seth. I think there's this argument comes up every year about the depth of quality in the Big Ten, and Penn State's always shown up as that third team in the Big Ten. And I just don't see it, to be honest. So watch with interest.
That's right. Well, I got one more that I'm interested in, and that is this Louisville-Notre Dame matchup. So Louisville has started off the year very well. Notre Dame obviously gets upended by Northern Illinois, but I think it's interesting that in the polls thus far, Notre Dame's still in the top 20. And in some ways, I know everybody kind of says, well, they lost Northern Illinois, they're out of the playoff picture. I don't know. I don't know if Notre Dame wins out, given their brand and what they are, if they're automatically out of the playoff conversation. And so Saturday, I think, presents them an opportunity to say, hey, look, that was a blip. We're still trying to figure out who we are. Riley Leonard is still coming to his own under the Golden Dome. So what are y'all's thoughts on that ball game Saturday?
Look, you picked another team that we're not particularly high on the College Chaps podcast. So we give Notre Dame an even harder time than Penn State.
Rightfully so.
I thought last week, and we've got some Notre Dame listeners who will jump up and down if they're listening to this podcast, but I thought last week the Notre Dame PR machine was well and truly out with Riley Leonard. Right, it was almost like every pass that he made, they were like, "Look, like he's back. He's a Heisman candidate." I'm not convinced by this Notre Dame team at all, and this is a tough place to play, right? And I just think it's still early in the season, right? So we haven't seen how these teams are really going to properly evolve thus far. But Notre Dame have heaped a whole lot of pressure on their shoulders, and it's how they cope with that pressure. Because I think you're right, Seth. I think as horrendous as the loss was, it hasn't truly negated them from the college football playoff. But I would say they're dancing on a very, very thin tightrope. But they have to go through the rest of the season not only unbeaten, but they have to impress. And I'm not sure that this Notre Dame team has it in them to do that. I know that's not your question. Will they win this game? They probably will do, but I wouldn't be surprised if Louisville make it incredibly difficult for them and actually expose many of the issues that this Notre Dame team actually has. So they need a blowout win here to get people to forget about Northern Illinois, but I'm not sure they get it. I don't know what the spread is, but I don't think that they'll beat the spread, and this could actually be a much closer game than people think.
Cardinals or Irish, Jimmy? Where are you sitting?
Well, I will tell you the spread. Notre Dame is favored by 6.5 at home. I've got the Cardinals, and I've got them winning. Notre Dame reminds me a lot of Michigan. They want to run it a lot. Leonard's thrown one touchdown this year, and it was last week against Miami of Ohio. They don't have a passing game, but they try to pass. That's the issue. So they're not like Michigan, where Michigan knows who they are, and Michigan is just going to try to run it down your throat all game. They're trying to pass the ball. So until Notre Dame finds out who they are and what they are actually going to do and are successful at it, I'm going to pick against the Irish every week. So I think Louisville is going to win this game. I love their defense. I love their physicality. I think that they're going to shut them down. And I think if Louisville scores 17 points, they're going to win this game.
This Notre Dame team is just super compelling to me for the main reason that given their schedule, and once they got past Texas A&M, I think it was the expectation of that fan base that it was now going to be a 3-month celebration toward the playoff because of the way the schedule lined up. And so if they experience more blemishes along this path after the Northern Illinois game, I think you're going to start to hear some voices within that program go, is Marcus Freeman the right guy? Are we going in the right direction? Because number one, I would venture a guess that their NIL collective paid handsomely for Riley Leonard to leave Durham to come to South Bend. And so that hasn't, I would say all three of us probably feel the same. That has not worked out as they thought it would thus far. And so that's problematic. I mean, it goes back to what Coach Saban said first week of the season on game day. You pay for your roster, and if you pick the wrong guys, well, like he said, you know what happens. You're out of luck. And so that's going to eventually, I think, fall on the head coach. And Marcus Freeman, look, Notre Dame is not a job where you're going to get a lot of time, I don't think. I think that is an impatient fan base. I think they believe, especially now in the 12-team landscape, they should be in the conversation, in the picture every single year. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very, very interested to see what the murmurs start to be if this turns into like an 8-4 or 9-3 season with them playing in some nondescript, non-New Year's Day bowl and outside that playoff picture.
I mean, if you put form to one side, it's inconceivable with a 12-team college football playoff, because actually, as much as we all look forward to the 12-team playoff, it heaps a lot of pressure on those programs that are on the periphery, right, to make that playoff. But, if you were to think about blue bloods, for want of a better word, could you see a college football playoff that didn't have Notre Dame, USC, Michigan in it, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, the way this has gone this far, I'll exclude Michigan from this sentence, because I think James is right. I think they had a really good win last year. I'm not sure the teams have done it anywhere near enough to get to the playoff situation. I think Notre Dame will find their independent status something of a weak link for them in this year, because of the way that their schedule plays out. And I think the loss that they incurred is going to be incredibly costly, because I think when you get to the crux of the season, where people are going to look back and look at the schedule, they could be the ones that miss out here. And then that heaps pressure. I know the Notre Dame fan base likes Marcus Freeman, but you're right, I don't think he gets a ton of time, because to miss out on the college football playoff just puts a huge amount of pressure on them.
All right, boys, we've covered a lot, and we're all counting down till the monster matchup on Saturday night at Bryant-Denny Stadium, on Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. May we mention? Let's not discount that. I can't wait. I love a big matchup like this with all this juice. It's one of those things where it just kind of gets the emotions flowing, and so I can't wait to watch it. I know you boys are the same. It's gonna be a late night / early morning for you, right, George?
Well, I think the game kicks off 12:30 my time, so that's a 4:30 Sunday morning finish, and then if there's a game after that, I'll see what's going. But I'm not sure I have that much energy left after that game. So yeah, that's the beauty of being a college football fan on this side of the pond.
Well, George, before you let you go, man, we're so thankful that you came on to chat with us. I always love getting to hang out with you. Please tell our listeners how they can find the College Chaps podcast, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify, how they can support y'all, how they can be proponents of what y'all are doing, because y'all do an excellent, excellent job.
Well, thank you, Seth and James, for having me on. I really enjoyed it. I loved it last time, and it's even better this time around, probably because James is on the call this time.
Undoubtedly.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts. We are the College Football Chaps on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube now. We've now entered into the realms of 21st century technology. We've just had Rich Clark, Executive Director of the College Football Playoff, on the podcast, which was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. He was very good. He told us some stories about his previous career as an Air Force pilot. And we've got some pretty good guests coming up right for college football for the Touchdown in the UK, so touchdown.co.uk, and write a couple of columns there which are principally on the SEC. And then I'm coming across to SEC land in 4 weeks' time. I'm going to be in, of all places, Starkville, Mississippi, to see Mississippi State play Arkansas. Sadly, Mississippi State have not been the team that perhaps hoped they would be, but I'm going to be in Mississippi in 4 weeks' time. So I am looking. I actually genuinely love being in SEC land. I do enjoy being in Mississippi, as I do enjoy being in Georgia and Alabama. So I'll be about for a few days on your side of the world.
This made my day. I need a college Chaps cowbell like I need air. Oh, that's so awesome, Stark Vegas. That's fantastic.
Well, I'm told to bring my earbuds with me, so that I've always wondered, when I watched it on TV, I've always wondered how loud it is in person, and I'm about to find out how loud it is in person. So, yeah, that's going to be quite exciting to get across to see that game.
Oh, that's fantastic, and you'll get to see Boss Hog himself, Sam Pittman, on the sidelines in person. So, man, that's awesome.
That's actually the biggest attraction. I mean, I passed through Stark Vegas once on my travels, but it wasn't game day. So I'm really looking forward to see game day. But as you know, Seth, I'm a huge fan of Sam Pittman, so I'm looking forward to see him on the sideline.
Well, George, we had a blast, brother, and I know you will be watching intently on Saturday night, just like we will. So we will. Yeah, man, we'll touch in with you soon. We may have to have you back because it's such a special year with the playoffs. I think there's probably more that we can talk about, but always value your insight, and boy, enjoy. So glad that we ran into each other and sat with each other at media days a couple years back.
Yeah,
that was a fortuitous seat placing. So, George, always great to see you, and Jimmy, we will end it how we always end it, which George can cover his ears. But go Dogs!
Go Dogs!